In a world inflamed in conflict, three men from different paths of faith come together to promote peace and equality for all humans. They celebrate their similarities rather than their differences. Tim Dyer, Sam Qadri, and Harvey Stone. As the Middle East remains embroiled in war, people are looking for safe sanctuary and a peaceful resolution to our differences. These three men are engaged in trying to change the narrative. They are the children of Abraham.
I'm the clergy associate for pastoral ministries for Trinity Memorial Church in Warren, PA, and St. Francis of Assisi Church in Youngsville, PA.
I'm Harvey Stone, and I'm a civil engineer.
My name is Sam Qadri. I work at Jamestown High School. I also work as an adjunct faculty member, JCC, teaching Islamic studies and Arabic as a foreign language.
I was on break from Clarion University and was studying the baptismal covenant, the Episcopal baptismal covenant. Questions that are asked of the person to be baptized really struck a chord with me. The first question was, will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? My neighbor at the time was my cousin. She's a Christian. I've got no problem loving her, and I can serve Christ in her. We may not agree on all things, but I can seek and serve Christ in her. What if the neighbor lived the other side of the world? Or if that neighbor was a Sikh, a Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, a Jew?
Well, I've always been interested in the idea of working with other religions and explaining how the Jewish religion fits in with other things. I've done some programs with the Episcopal Church where I taught the Bible. Sons of Abraham are the religions. They all came from the same place.
The three monotheistic religions are represented in the Abrahamic faith concept, the Abrahamic initiative, and that's because we were able to conclude and agree that each of our faiths come as a descendant and or from the lineage all the way back to Abraham, the prophet.
He and his wife Sarah had been promised, God had made a promise to him, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars.
Abraham decided at some point in his life that having idols around didn't make a whole lot of sense, that if you could make the idol, then why would you worship it? He visualized a God that was all-knowing and all-encompassing, and that he felt that he could pray to. Apparently, God answered him, told him that he was on the right track, and this was the thing he should be doing.
I became interested when I got the call from Tim that he says, well, you know, we have this idea, we would like you to present about Islam in our church. I had made several presentations before in the post 9/11 terrorist attacks. I kind of began to think and plan my life around discussing my own faith and culture and heritage, because I have witnessed and saw in the U.S. an increase in backlash against Muslims and Arabs across the country.
Tim Dyer gave me a call and asked me if I was interested in participating. He told me he would like to get a rabbi from the area, but he found that there weren't any, and that somebody had recommended he talk to me. Listening to the current verbiage from the presidential candidates, it kind of makes you wonder. This is a country that was built on equality, and regardless of your religion, you had the same rights. And all of a sudden, we've got people saying, well, if you're a Muslim, you shouldn't be able to run for president. And that's ridiculous. I mean, either we are a free country or we're not.
The Jewish people trace their ancestry, and since Jesus was a Jew, Christians also trace their ancestry back to Isaac. Arabs trace their ancestry back to Ishmael. They all trace their ancestry to Abraham. Some of us may remember from the book of Genesis a story about a man named Abraham. Depending on which person you speak to and their particular faith, the story can change just a bit. But here it is in a nutshell. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. He was to leave his father's land and go to the land of Canaan. The only problem was that Abraham and his wife Sarah didn't have any children. Sarah was getting on in years and was beyond the normal childbearing age. She encouraged Abraham to have children with her servant Hagar, who was Egyptian, so that God's promise could be fulfilled. Hagar became pregnant and had Ishmael. A few years later, Sarah became pregnant and had a son named Isaac. Sarah began to have problems with Hagar and told Abraham to send her away with Ishmael into the desert. He did as asked by Sarah and sent them away. The narrative can be heard slightly different depending on who you talk to. But Hagar is in the desert with Ishmael and pleads with God to spare her son. A water well appears, and they are saved. Arabs trace their ancestry back to Ishmael. Jews and Christians trace their ancestry back to Isaac. All three major religions trace their ancestry back to Abraham. While we share that common ancestry, if you look at history, all three religions have persecuted one another at some point. But in that history, there are also times and places where they've come together and helped one another and have coexisted in peace. We come from different backgrounds and traditions. We do not speak the same language of worship, yet we share common religious ancestry. We follow different teachings, which are made known to us by sacred scriptures. Yet we come together. We honor and celebrate our diversity, but more importantly, our similarities. If civilization or humanity is to survive, then we must work together to heal our communities. Peace is possible, but it must be pursued with education, understanding, and a loving heart. The Children of Abraham Project is designed as an interfaith dialogue initiative. The term interfaith dialogue refers to a cooperative, constructive, and positive interaction between people of different religious traditions. In doing some research about interfaith dialogue, I came across a blog by the Reverend Denise Yarborough, who is an Episcopal priest and the Director of Religious and Spiritual Life at the University of Rochester. She describes interfaith dialogue as being all about building committed relationships, friendships that can endure the tensions of troubled times. It is all about making friends out of strangers. An interfaith encounter is not about debating who is right and who is wrong, who is in and who is out, or who is enlightened and who is backward. An interfaith encounter is about forming relationships with people who have a different worldview, different religious or spiritual or philosophical approach to our common human experience. An interfaith encounter is about learning the different narratives that inform how our dialogue partners understand the world. It's about taking the time and effort to try and look through their lens, even if only for a brief moment. Interfaith dialogue makes it possible to empathize with those who are embroiled in the worst of the conflicts that are erupting around the world. Empathy helps us to remember the humanity of those whom we disagree and helps to prevent them from becoming enemies whom we can justify demonizing and eradicating. We come together today not to proselytize or to convert anyone. We are here to listen, to learn, to understand, and to hopefully counteract the bigotry, hatred, and stereotypical images that inundate our society. Our hope is to bring change and reconciliation to the world, one mind, one heart at a time, because we are one human family.
So that's why we use the term the Abrahamic Faith Initiative. So we now work together as a team to accomplish those lectures.
I can put on the mask of President Carter and go rob a bank. But that doesn't mean President Carter went and robbed the bank on his lunch hour. I had seen so many news broadcasts that were portraying Muslims as AK-47 toting maniacs. They wanted to kill everybody. And I couldn't believe that that was an actual portrayal of the common, everyday Muslim.
There's a lot of misconceptions about the Jewish faith. When I was in college, I went to a college in upstate New York. I was a commuter in that I had an apartment in downtown Troy. As a result of that, I was in with the commuter group. One day we're sitting in the Union, and some guy's kind of hovering behind me. I'm sitting on a couch, and some guy's kind of hovering behind me. Finally, I just asked him, I said, "What the heck are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm looking for your horns. Yeah, I heard you were Jewish, and I just wanted to see." You know, I came from an area where it was 50 to 60% Jewish. It's the kind of thing that never even came up. I didn't know Jews had horns. But apparently, there are places where there is that thought. And I think there's a lot of ignorance, especially in more rural areas, because there's no exposure, or there are very few Jewish people in the more rural areas, and stories tend to be believed simply because there's nothing to refute them.
I also saw news reports between Israel and Palestine. One would commit a violent act against the other, and then they would retaliate with even more violence and hatred. And it was just one continual cycle. But I couldn't believe that every Jew wanted to kill. And a lot of these acts are committed because the only information we are fed about them, these portrayals of ISIS and these other organizations that commit these heinous acts against people. And it's not an accurate representation. One of the only ways to combat this stereotypical images and this hatred was through education.
Islam is not the enemy, that Islam is a religion of peace, that Islam itself teaches moderation, that Muhammad the Prophet does talk about how one has to be loving to their neighbor. I thought this is not too far away from what I like to do. It's not too far away from what I can do. And I figured it's a community involvement for me. I figured it will help others learn, because that's what we're all about. We're about learning and teaching.
In my 20s, I was able to go to Israel for a couple of week vacation. It was the first time in my life that I could walk down a street and know that just about everybody in the street was Jewish. It was different. And they were speaking Hebrew. And the little kids were speaking Hebrew. I had been in Portugal and I had been in Spain, where you could walk down the street and you knew just about everybody was Catholic. It was different. It was a good feeling to know that I was in a place where I was the same as everybody instead of being different. The place where the Jews weren't persecuted was China. There weren't very many there, probably because the primary religion, which is Buddhism in China, is very tolerant of everything. When you got into Europe, Russia, the Ukraine, Poland, Czechoslovakia, those places were horrendous, and people were treated horribly. You wonder why. They were different. I mean, it just came down to they were different. They prayed to a different deity. They prayed in a different way. They went to a different church. Whatever it was that singled the Jews out as being different created all these problems. And part of the issue is that the leaders of these countries had so many problems because of the way they governed. If they could find a scapegoat, if they could find someone they could point to and say, well, the problem that we don't have any food isn't because I didn't do a good job of leading you, it's because these Jews here took all your money, or they ate all the food, or, they cursed you, that kind of thing. And it's a shame that that's what happened. Today, here we are in the United States looking at similar problems that occurred in Europe. It may not be the Jews now, but maybe it's the Syrians that we're looking at and saying, oh, we can't let them into the country because they're all going to be attacking us. People came to this country as immigrants. Everybody in this country except the Indians were immigrants at one point, whether they came in the revolution or they came after the revolution or they came in the 20s, it doesn't really matter.
It was a no-brainer for me to join this team and say, I'll be willing to assist as much as I can. We've done now so far about 5 or 6 presentations. But on my own, though, through the Islamic Society of Jamestown's outreach program, I've done close to possibly 28 or so, 29 presentations aside from what we're doing now with the Abrahamic Initiative presentations.
And I think that that's one of the things that we need to do, is come together, learn of one another.
We need to know more about those similarities that not a lot of people actually know about, because it's not taught. It's not taught in schools, it's not taught in churches, in synagogues or in mosques possibly. So we wanted to gather that energy and help it flow in a particular positive direction through presentations like that.
I do believe that all three faiths share a loving God. We have different theologies, we have different practices.
The perception that all Muslims are terrorists and that all Muslims are going to come around and Islamize America or, Islamize Europe. Some people are actually just scared, pure and simple, and they begin to kind of give labels to Muslims and to Arabs, or because they looked like someone in the movie or they looked like someone in the media outlet where they did a terrorist attack somewhere because they're an extremists and they wanted to use the religion or the faith for their own personal agenda in the political world.
It's time that the people in power, the government, realize that that's why we're such a strong nation, is because we are immigrants and we came from so many different places. We brought so much to this country.
My name is Sam, and I'm a Muslim American. Allahu Akbar. I was born in 1966 in Palestine. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. When it was under the Jordanian rule at the time. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Became part of the occupied West Bank of when the Israelis took over at the time, and I graduated high school, came to the U.S. January 1986, went to college in Buffalo. I finished college and began working multiple different jobs at first before I was offered a full-time position as a technology education teacher. إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. My background in education as far as degree is concerned was a dual major, in fact, industrial technology and technology education. And then I was offered the position later on, about 1995 actually, to work as a tech ed teacher at Jamestown High School. سمع الله لمن حمده. Allahu Akbar. I began working there. I've been since 1995. I've been here in Jamestown since that time. So that's just closed actually 20 years in Jamestown High School, living here and with my family. I have 3 children. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. I got married to my lovely wife from Palestine also, and we both now live and work actually here in Jamestown.
What brought you here? I mean, what inspired you to move from Palestine?
The objective was for me after high school to attend college, get a college degree, make a life out of my for myself, and then build a family. It didn't matter where. And I recall at one point in time after high school, my dad was telling me that, hey, you should apply for colleges, in the Middle East, in Europe. And I actually put an application for a university in Romania, of all places. At the time it was the Eastern Bloc, USSR, and then another application I put in to America. And I had an uncle who called me and he says, it's better for you to come to America and have a degree from America than going to Romania and have a degree from a communist country. And I kind of, at the time, truly didn't know what the difference was. And so I just kind of said, oh, okay, sounds good. My uncle had a vote for it, so I'm going to apply for a visa to go to America to get educated. And upon finishing my education, the intent was to come back to my family and make a life and family and establish some kind of employment back in Palestine. It did not work the way I thought I planned it to be. All the time, as year after year in college, I was always telling my friends, as soon as I'm finished with college, I'm just gonna go back and work with my family, family business, and just do what I can do back in the old country. And that idea was pretty much was shot down, believe it or not. The first Gulf War that happened in 1991, that's when I graduated and I wanted to go back, and then the Gulf War started in mid-January. I could not go back to start anything for that matter because chaos began to happen. And at that time, my dad says, what are you going to come here and do? People are getting killed left and right. Stay where you are. Find a way to, live and, survive somewhere else. Don't come back. And I kind of thought about that for a while. And I honestly believed that it's not good for me to go back. So I kind of began working and applied for positions here as practical training within the engineering field, as manufacturing engineering. And so as a manufacturing engineer, production engineer, with a couple of factories in the Buffalo area at the time. And then, got laid off a couple times. I mean, it was very, I found engineering at the time for me to be a very unstable employment or position to be in. And then I kind of thought about my other degree area, which was education and teaching. And that's when I applied for the position at Jamestown High School. And then in 1995, sure enough, I was accepted for, through a couple of interviews, and then I was offered the job at JHS, Jamestown High School.
So you found a home here in America.
I certainly did. I found a home in America. I strongly believe that America has offered me an opportunity that I don't believe would have been offered for me anywhere else in the world, to be honest with you. So the concept of receiving that opportunity and as a product of of a process which I would label as popularly known as an immigration process, as a product of the process, and having gained the benefits of that process, to me, what basically was a truly out of this world experience. All the way from a young man coming in right out of high school, trying to figure out what to do, how to do it. And I kept praying, and since then I always kept praying in my mind, Lord, I don't have anyone in here. I have nobody. I have a lot of friends, but you know what I mean. I have no family. I have no relatives. To me, when I have no family, no relatives, my brothers, my sister are not around me. You always feel by yourself until you connect with the Creator. In such a manner that I felt, inspired. Sometimes I felt things are facilitated for me to happen and to be done, and then all of a sudden I find myself in places where are beneficial for me. Employment. I kept praying, God, please give me your blessings. I'm dedicating myself to you. I kept praying. I've made a covenant with you. You give me your blessings, and I'll work for you. This is something that continues to stick in my mind, and I continue to remind myself of it, so I can maintain that connectivity with my Creator, who created the whole universe. I believe in God, or in Arabic, Allah. Once I began to understand that the education that I received here in the U.S. was one that helped me grow mentally, educationally, and over time, obviously, in experience. That cultural shock that I had at the beginning, where I actually couldn't understand what people used to say to me in English. So I had to learn English. I spent a year and a half learning just language arts and English at the University of Buffalo, UB's English Language Institute. At the time it was called, I don't know if that name changed, but ELI, it used to be IELI. So, one word, unification, and not being divisive. Tackling those misconceptions together and speaking and defending each other as one block, as one unit, instead of being scattered and being divided, and how Satan, tackles one who is on his own, running away, in a different direction, where Satan cannot tackle a group. That's where what I envision, for America. Some kind of a unity, some type of a coalition that would be, I'm hoping someday, how I used to hear this phrase from some friends and, on TV and so forth. America was found on Judeo-Christian values. Wouldn't it be nice and powerful if we include the third Abrahamic religion in that pile and say, America is based on the Abrahamic initiative, or Abrahamic faith religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, or Christianity, Islam, Judaism. However, I don't care about not in a particular order. But I believe Muslims have been in America a long time ago, from the time of Columbus, and we have evidence of that in history. So Muslims are not new to America. So I think we can, if we want to, there has to be intentionality, there has to be willingness, there has to be good faith and good sincerity in the action that we do on a daily basis, with the intent on being inclusive and not exclusive. This is all about liberty and justice for all, and not liberty and justice for the few. This is where the decision has to be made by the individual person, family, entity, organization, agency. So, which side of the aisle would you like to be? Are you going to be among those who, liberty and justice for the few or for the some? Or are we going to be on that side of liberty and justice for all? That's what I believe in our Constitution and the strength of our Constitution and our pledge. That's what I pledged myself for this country, as it offered me all of the benefits. I offer it back all my sincerity and my love and my work towards its maintenance, so it continues to be the way it was intended to be by our founding fathers of this great nation. So, as a Muslim myself, as an Arab, I'm not gonna just stand there and just watch all of this stuff happening and not say anything. I needed to feel that there's some type of a counter to that. So I felt the stereotype of all these Muslims, they're killing people because they're not Muslims, or trying to force someone to be in the faith or die if they don't. Again, another misconception, and that's wrong. In Islam, in the Quran itself, there is a verse that actually discusses this, and it says there is no compulsion in religion, which means that you can't force anyone to be of the Islamic faith if they don't want to. It's a choice. You either take it as a lifestyle and you practice it, or you choose not to.
As a Jew, I've always wanted peace. It's kind of in our DNA that all we're doing is looking for some peace.
Even in a Bible written in Arabic, God is Allah. That's the way it is written in a Christian Bible that is written in Arabic. It's Allah. So when they pray to Allah, they're praying to God. All three faiths believe in serving the greater community, serving the poor, the outcast.
So we all believe that he was our father. We all believe he started the concept of monotheism, which is the ability of one to submit their life and actions to the will of one God, the will of the Creator. So the act of submission, we all submit to God. We also submit to one God.
All three try and reach out and help people.
And that's exactly what the word Islam technically means. Islam is an Arabic word that literally means worship in submission of that one God.
It's important that all of us recognize it's not just us. It's not just the Jews that want peace. Everybody wants peace. I mean, nobody wants war.
In the Bible, in the Torah perhaps, and in the Quran perhaps, there are actually verses that talk about violence, that address issues of, defend yourself. So there is, I'm trying to recall now, there is a couple of verses in the Quran that asks Muslim practitioners to defend themselves, their families, their countries, even it has to be you're fighting for them. So which means, example, if you're going to come to my house in the middle of the night and you're going to have a weapon and you're going to tell me in my own home that, for example, now you're going to rob my house, you're going to kill my children, you're going to threaten my children, my wife and my kids and my home and my sanctity, in the sanctity of my home, God says to me in my faith that I have the right to defend myself by all means necessary to save my life or my children's lives or my spouse, my wife and my home and my property. So in the same verse it ends with, and it says, although I'm giving you the permission to defend yourself, it says you must not act offensively in an aggressive manner, which means you can't be the aggressor, which means you can't go on and all of a sudden you want to start war just because you wanted to.
November 13th, 2015, Paris, France.
We are now truly facing an unknown and historic situation in Paris.
On an evening when scores of Paris residents and tourists were enjoying a soccer match between France and world champion Germany, horror struck in an unprecedented manner.
We were inside the stadium, and approximately half an hour after the beginning of the game, we heard two big explosions.
France's president was inside the soccer stadium where explosions broke up the game.
This is a terrible hardship.
It was a bloodbath, and they shot at us, and they reloaded the guns several times, multiple times.
It sounded like there would be more than one, and it also sounded as if they'd stopped to reload, and then they reloaded again, and then more gunshots fired the second time around.
Terrorists, some with guns and some reportedly with bombs strapped to themselves, attacked multiple sites throughout Paris and at the stadium where the soccer match was underway. ISIS claimed responsibility for the Paris attacks.
Once again, we've seen an outrageous attempt to terrorize innocent civilians. This is an attack not just on Paris, it's an attack not just on the people of France, but this is an attack on all of humanity and the universal values that we share.
130 innocent people died as a result. In the wake of this tragedy, Sam Qadri and Tim Dyer came together at a prayer vigil held in downtown Jamestown, New York, to offer prayers and words of wisdom to those heartbroken by the events that had taken place.
Plaza in Jamestown on a cold Friday night to remember the victims of the recent terrorist attacks in Paris and around the world. Jews, Muslims, and Christians prayed together in English, Spanish, French, Arabic, and Hebrew. The multicultural vigil carried a message of support for the victims of terrorist attacks and their families. And the prayers called for peace, guidance, and unity.
We pray for our communities to get better and to be better, to rid ourselves and our communities from prejudices and bigotry and violence and all of those evil acts that some human beings decide to do and follow evildoers.
O God Almighty, you made us as one human family. Look with compassion upon your creation. Take away the arrogance and the hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love. Fill us with your grace and peace so that we may work together through our struggles and confusions to accomplish your purpose on earth, that all nations and races may serve you in harmony.
The vigil ended with a song and final message to go in peace.
I mean, nobody wants war. I mean, not really. It's how you get there that everybody has a differing opinion about. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to achieve peace. I think that because of the nature of the project, the people that we are talking to are people who perhaps don't understand the cultures of different religions simply because they haven't been exposed to them. Judaism, maybe, the Muslim faith is definitely, people have not been exposed to it, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it. I think it's important that the word gets out, that everybody wants the same thing, and everybody prays to the same God pretty much. And, you know, whether you call him one name or another name, it doesn't make any difference.
I see the beauty in the religions. I see the similarities, the love.
Every time we do this, it's a whole new program. I think more people need to be exposed to the various religious viewpoints.
God would want you to do to be peaceful, to help talk about your own faith to people, you know, and you don't have to be violent about it. If they accept it, welcome. If they don't accept it, move forward.
I think peace with other faiths and other cultures is the only way that humanity will survive.
Who has heard this saying before? You shall love your neighbors yourself. It comes from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which is part of the Torah. Who has heard, None of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. This comes from the Quran, the 13th Hadith. And how about this saying? In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. This comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7. These are all variations of the golden rule of how we are to treat one another. This is just one of the examples of the similarities that we come together to celebrate. As we listen, we learn and understand. I hope that we can come to celebrate that we are one human family.